Brilliant. So I think we will make a start this morning. Firstly, a huge good morning to everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Essential Skills Reflecting on Policy, Practice and Impact. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are really delighted to have people from across the youth work, education, policymaking and the wider sector. Just before we get started, a very small bit of housekeeping. So we will be recording today's session and we'll send the recording over to everyone after the event. And we have also factored in some time today for a bit of a Q&A. So please do add any questions into the Q&A and that will be managed by my colleague Finn. And if you have any questions for a specific panel member, please do add their name into the question so we can direct it in the right way. We might not be able to get through all the questions, and if we can't, that's absolutely fine. We will pass on those questions and the contact details of the panel members at the end of the discussion. So that's enough for housekeeping. Just by way of introduction, I'm George Kearney-Bambridge, CEO of Envision. And for those of you who don't know who Envision are, we are a UK-based charity working in London, the West Midlands and Bristol. And our work is firmly rooted in the belief that a young person's background mustn't determine their future. We run structured 12 or 20-week programmes to support young people from less advantaged backgrounds to develop their essential skills and their confidence that are proven to support their education, employment and well-being. And it's for this reason that I'm really excited today to be hosting this conversation with a really fantastic panel at a very interesting point for the youth and education landscape. So there's quite a lot going on right now, and every time I go to any other webinar or a conversation with peers, everyone's talking about all of the moving pieces. So over the past few months, and even this week with the release of the Every Child Achieving and Thriving white paper, we've seen a number of different policy developments that in various different ways signal this growing recognition of the role of essential skills play in a young person's life. The white paper, obviously, that came out earlier this week explicitly acknowledges that academic attainment alone is no longer enough. Yay! We can see that growing recognition that actually we all want young people who are not just academically capable, but are engaged, responsible citizens who are ready to shape their community. And we thought we'd just pull out a few headlines of these kind of various papers and developments to help ground the conversation today. So we obviously had the curriculum and assessment review, and that curriculum review really opened questions about what we really value in education, not just knowledge and qualifications, but the wider skills that young people need to navigate life and the rapidly changing world. The recent reforms have placed a real strong emphasis on enrichment, on personal development, and on essential skills that are embedded within the school curriculum. And the enrichment entitlement has then reinforced this idea that learning doesn't just stop at the classroom door, something that I'm sure many of us can consider and think about on this process. The wider skills young people need to navigate work and the rapidly changing world are really, really fundamental. And the recent reforms have placed a real strong emphasis on enrichment, personal development, and essential skills within the school curriculum. But this commitment around enrichment shifts to really ensuring that the young person has meaningful access to enrichment no matter where they live. And the National Youth Strategy also has underlined the importance of collaboration to drive young people's success, particularly highlighting a move from national to local approach, whilst increasing the youth voice, the agency, and making sure that young people can shape decisions and have access to those really meaningful and important role models. So what's striking across all of these policies is that essential skills are increasingly acknowledged, but often in very kind of broad and high level ways. And the challenge now is understanding how these commitments really translate into clear expectations, consistent delivery, and meaningful recognition for young people themselves. So firstly, before we kind of move into more kind of conversation, what are essential skills? I'm aware that many of you are very aware of and probably partner with Skillsbuilder. But today, when we're talking about essential skills, we're talking about those skills that really underpin success across education, employment, and life. Things like communication, teamwork, determination, creativity. They are these really highly transferable skills that are needed not just in any job, but pretty much in everything we do. They are the skills that ensure that young people can speak up when they're unsure, work with others when things don't quite go to plan, persevere when things feel difficult, and adapt to new situations. And ultimately, they go and grow with you throughout their life. I'm sure we can all think of times when all of these skills are really, really relevant to our day-to-day life. Their value is really well supported by educators and employers, but these skills are really still taught inconsistently in schools and colleges. And young people from less advantaged backgrounds often have less opportunities to develop them. And as a result, we know, and through research from our colleagues, many of which are on the calls today, we know that young people can become caught in this, what is often described as a skills trap. So children from low-income households have fewer opportunities to practice their essential skills. That limits their access to higher skilled or higher paid work. And that also is then linked to those lower life satisfaction. And we know that from the research that higher essential skills are also associated with that higher annual wage premium of around kind of £3,500 to £4,000. So that underlines just how significant these skills are, both for economic and social outcomes. So we've talked a little bit about skills, we've talked about those areas, but why does this really matter? There is still, and there remains to be, this real opportunity gap for young people from less advantaged backgrounds. And we know that educational outcomes matter, but increasingly we know that attainment alone doesn't capture a young person's ability to navigate life challenges and opportunities. Many young people are leaving school with good grades, but they're still lacking that confidence to lead a team, communicate effectively, or kind of tackle those real world problems. And some of this data is really clear. So the Impetus report from a few years ago says that actually young people from less advantaged backgrounds are still roughly twice as likely to be not in education, employment and training than their peers. That hasn't changed. And crucially, that research shows that only around half of that employment gap can be explained by differences in qualifications. The rest is driven by those non-academic factors, things like essential skills, confidence, or their kind of experience. When we then look at the scale, the challenge becomes even starker. And I know, Helene, that's something that you were kind of talking about today within your kind of West Midlands focus. Between July and September 2025, more than 940,000 young people were not in education, employment and training. And given the massive disproportionate risk faced by those young people from less advantaged backgrounds, that suggests that the need is all really widespread, but also heavily concentrated on those that are already facing those great barriers. And the risks are growing. So the recent Skills Imperative report demonstrated that by 2035, up to 7 million people could lack the essential skills they need for their jobs. So without that targeted support, today's skills gaps risk becoming tomorrow's entrenched inequalities, and that limits young people's life chances. So taking all of this together, this evidence tells us something quite important. We know that academic attainment alone isn't enough, but if we're really serious about improving outcomes, we need approaches that develop essential skills, confidence, and real-world experiences alongside qualifications, particularly for those young people who stand to benefit the most. And this is where this conversation comes in today. At Envision, we directly work with young people through youth-led social action and support them to develop their essential skills like creativity, communication, and teamwork by making that real change in their communities. And from our perspective, I guess we see both firsthand the power of these skills, but also the gaps between kind of policy ambition and then a young person's lived experience. And today we know that the need is clearly there, but we want to think about how do we collaborate together to make this change a reality? It's not all doom and gloom. What can we do to actually kind of really make a dent in these figures? And we hope through today's conversation, we get the opportunity to bring together national and regional policy perspectives, delivery organisations, and also that lived experience to explore kind of three key questions, if you like. How are essential skills currently being valued and reflected in policy and the changes that are happening, and what's missing? What does good policy look like on the ground, and what does that policy into practice look like? And then what needs to change if we genuinely are serious about improving the lives of young people and ensuring that they have the skills that they need to develop to thrive in the future? So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and give that little overview. And I'm going to hand over to our wonderful panel who are here today with me to share their experiences and really kind of give us a bit of an insight into the various different experiences they bring around this conversation. So I'm going to ask each of you, if you don't mind, to introduce yourself just for 1 minute, your name, your role and organisation, and the lens or perspective that you are bringing to this conversation today. And Olly, do you mind if I come to you first, please?
Of course, thank you so much for that intro, George, and really clear framing of the issue. Lovely to have lots of colleagues with us today. Yeah, I'm Olly Newton, Exec Director at the Edge Foundation, and previously a policymaker and led on young people not in education, employment, or training at DFE. So, hoping to bring both of those lenses today. And I guess the frames that I bring are kind of from a variety of different angles at Edge. I just wanted to pick out two. There's the kind of macro framing, which is the work that we do around things like the skills shortage bulletins, understanding the way that the labour market is changing, where employers are very clear that these transferable essential skills are what they need and the best protection in the changing labour market. And then we also get to see the micro level and going to see schools and colleges where they're doing a really great job of improving young people's skills, bringing this into the classroom. I'll say a bit more about that later, but it's amazing to see the benefits in terms of making education relevant, helping young people feel really engaged, and seeing them develop those kind of holistic skills that we're looking for, not just exam results. So I think both of those are important. Thank you.
Fantastic. Helene, can I come to you next?
You certainly can, George. So, good morning, everybody. My name's Helene Dearn. I'm the Interim Director of Policy and Strategy at the West Midlands Combined Authority. I have held posts within the WMCA for the last sort of 18 months, nearly 2 years now. And prior to that, I spent over 40 years working in central government for the Department for Work and Pensions. And I think I bring quite a unique lens to this conversation, one of both understanding the national desire and need to have a system that works for everybody, alongside actually how that impacts then on a regional and local level, and the reality that that brings for the young people within my part of the country here in the West Midlands. West Midlands is one of the youngest and most diverse areas within the UK, and this is critical for our region, because if we are to aspire to the economic growth and the regeneration that we want to see in the West Midlands, our young people have got to be front and centre in that solution, and then feeling part of and having the skills to be able to grow that future for our region. So that's the lens that I'm going to bring to you today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Josephine, I'll come over to you next.
Thank you, George. Good morning, everyone. My name is Josephine. I'm currently the Youth Trustee at Envision. I'm also an Envision graduate. I'm looking forward to today's panel, and I hope to bring to this discussion a bit more about how Envision really benefited me when I was in education, and how those skills, those essential skills I learned and established, I use today at work, and really to discuss more about the importance of bridging the gap between education and the working world, because the traditional education system alone just doesn't do enough to help bridge that gap and help young people feel empowered when they are making that transitioning, whether it's to higher education or to enter the world of work. And I'm very much also looking forward to speaking about what I found out recently in terms of reading the white paper, but also speaking with other young people about what the challenges they're facing in school, and how organizations like Envision and other young people focused organizations such as the Edge Foundation can really be so pivotal in helping those young people feel more empowered and more ready to go through certain stages of life, feeling they are equipped to do that effortlessly.
Thank you so much. Brilliant. Fran, over to you next.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. Lovely to see everyone this morning. So my name is Fran Wilby. I'm Programme Director for Rethinking Assessment, and we are interested in pushing for a broader assessment system. And the reason it's relevant today is that, as we know, there's kind of quite narrow assessment measures at certain points in young people's education experience. But our question is always, what can teachers and educators and communities do right now with the system that we have to support a really enriched educational experience? And the other hat I'm bringing today is with our work with Enrichment for All, which is very exciting. So a new national coalition, which hopefully I can share a bit about later on. But essentially, the perspective I'm bringing today is to kind of think about skills as a foundational block, and then go up one and say more broadly, what's the enriched education experience that we want for young people more broadly? So what enriches young lives is the question. So lovely to be here.
Great, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Ben, over to you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ben Gadsby. I'm Head of Policy and External Affairs at Skillsbuilder UK. Some of you might be thinking, isn't that Alice Chan? And the answer is Alice Chan is on mat leave, and I'm Alice's mat cover, for anybody wondering about that. Skillsbuilder obviously is the organisation that developed the universal framework to try and get everybody talking the same language when it comes to essential skills and thinking about how we can kind of build those skills step by step to support all young people to succeed. In a previous life, I actually worked for Impetus, whose research you already cited. So I need to email the team and say, add that to the stakeholder list of people mentioning the research. And before that, I had jobs advising politicians. So I guess I'll be bringing a political lens to the discussion if we need one at some point.
Brilliant, thank you. So I am sure you will all agree when I say a really fantastic panel today with some really meaty discussions to be had. And I think to warm us up and to kind of kick off, I'm going to start with a bit of an open question to everybody. And so I'm going to let anyone kind of come off mute and jump in here. But when we talk about kind of essential skills, what does that mean in your world and why does it matter? Big question to kick us off.
Wow, it's like who's gonna leap first?
Yeah, Olly, it's going to be you now. Clearly,
it's going to be me. I mean, I think we've talked about these for a long time, and we all know what they are in our hearts, and we all see them every day in our work. But I think what the universal framework and the work that Skillsbuilder have done really well is to start to put a common language around them, and to start to bust this myth of you can't measure these, to speak to Fran's point about assessment, or they're too intangible. We just need to kind of hope that they're going to happen, and shown us that actually these are things that are very clearly of value in the labour market. They're things that people use every day in their work. They're things that employers are looking for and that they assess against when they're hiring people. And more importantly, thinking about growth mindset and everything else that we look at in schools, they're things that we can build. You're not just naturally a good communicator or not. It's something that you need to work at throughout your career. So I feel like it's a very hopeful set of messages. And I feel like the universal framework and what we're talking about today has given us much more of a structure, both at the kind of policy end and the practice end, to talk about these skills and to help young people to develop them in a much more structured way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Olly, what you were mentioning there about just that ability to, that we have to intentionally practice them, right? It's not just something, we don't sit down at a piano and suddenly we can play a concert pianist. We have to practice essential skills in that same way. And actually it can be done with rigor and impact and measurability, which actually creates impact for young people. Josephine, can I just come into you on this one, I think? Obviously, you are kind of have had that experience of really intentionally practicing and developing those essential skills through Envision, but also taking that into the world of work. So why does it matter to you?
I think it's so important because, as I mentioned earlier, the traditional education system doesn't really teach you or prepare you to bridge that gap between working, between learning and working. And not to say that you stop learning when you start working, but it's just that whole idea of as a young person, you're already feeling quite a high level of insecurity going into the world of work, not really knowing if your voice wants to be heard, not really knowing when to speak up or not really knowing when to be quiet, but also really not knowing what you can say you have as a skill. Because often you say, you see job descriptions like great communicator, someone who's used to working, who has great teamwork abilities, and often you don't really have opportunities to show that, but you're not. There's no confirmation in, yes, I do have that skill. I do have teamwork. I do have great communication skills. And when you start working, there's that expectation for you to be able to implement that almost seamlessly. But if you haven't had opportunities to practice that, it can be very difficult, which again then impacts the confidence element around coming into work. And it echoes the same type of feeling around not feeling like school was really for you. Then that then spirals and creates a feeling of, then where do I go? So I think it's so important that, that transition where we're seeing extracurriculum, helping young people establish those skills, it helps that transition piece. It helps them have an ownership and identity and say, I actually do have this skill. I have great teamwork, and here's an example of this. Or I do have great communication skills, and here's an example of this. It helps just add that evidence to the point, and they're able to give further explain on it. And I think it just creates a bit more of awareness as well. You know, as you get older, you're probably less likely to be told off or corrected. There's that expectation to have an element of self-awareness. When you have these skills and when you're able to talk about times where you've used these skills or times where you've seen that there needs to be improvement in these skills, it helps that self-awareness piece, and it just helps that transition a bit more, where you come into work and you feel as if, even though I know I'm just at the beginning of my career, here's what I have to offer, here's what I do really well, and here's what can be built upon and built upon. That foundation is laid quite nicely.
Brilliant.
George, could I
Yes,
just pop in if
please
that's
do.
all right? So
Yeah,
it just builds really on what was just said, in that, you know, a lot of the engagement and insight that we gather from young people across our region starts with a lack of confidence, lack of aspiration, and real connectivity with their own futures, their communities, and where they see the world around them progressing. And I fundamentally see that essential skills will build confidence, will build self-esteem, will give hope and aspiration to young people in our region, but really help them have that connectivity with society, and the communities around them, and their role within that and their contribution towards that. And they're not having that built in them in the current school education system as a whole. And you know, there has been a lack of support around young people outside of the school system for that for such a long time as well, due to, you know, various things. But we absolutely see that these skills king of our next generation, if we can bring them in at all parts of their development, not just in school, in what they do outside of school, what they do in their communities, and then what they go on to, whether it be in FE, in further education or higher education, or straight into the world of work.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think one of the points you mentioned there is also that element of belonging, and it's really interesting to see how that's called out in the white paper, and actually how much these skills and that confidence piece also attributes to this element of, I belong in this area, I belong in this world, I belong in this job, I belong in this community, and that's really integral to thinking about a young person's agency and success as well. Anybody else want to come in there until we kind of, or Fran, go for it before we zoom back out.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. I just wanted to build on those brilliant points. I think as well, it's a question of allowing young people to develop these skills and practice them. As we were saying, it's kind of something that needs to be continual, and apply them in different contexts, because as we know, it's not something that's like exam technique. It's something that shifts over time as a person. We're all, you know, we might communicate one way in one context and one in another. So it's about offering young people different ways of applying those skills and then evidencing them. That's kind of where my work with assessment and enrichment crosses over, because, you know, enrichment stuff, you know, projects, different forms of assessment and qualifications, when you kind of get down that end towards, you know, projects, etc. The Envision programs, you know, kind of baked into what you do is the social action projects, then sharing those in a presentation. So practicing those skills as a way of building confidence for young people. And one of the things we're quite interested is then, how do young people share them? And Josephine was talking about, you know, that being a basis, then go out into the world of work. We do quite a lot around learner profiles, and that is a way that a learner can build up evidence over time of all these different experience, projects, activities. You know, it's not all about assessment. I'd also caveat to say there are some things we shouldn't be assessing. We should, you know, value those experiences in what they are. But actually, the reflection on the experience is really important. So what are the ways that we're doing to support that as young people go through on that journey?
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting. We talk a lot about safe spaces to practice and fail, but also increasing stakes. You know, how do we make sure that any of these opportunities and chances to develop these skills are increasingly, they can try them out in different ways, and it's about giving them the confidence and the agency to be able to take those skills into different situations and settings, which is key. Fantastic. I think then we're going to start today really by zooming out, right, and thinking, how are essential skills, all of these things that we're saying are really, really integral and important to young people's success, how are they recognized in policy, and where the systems are maybe still kind of falling short on what we can do about it. So Olly, I think I'm going to come to you first on this, but from your view across kind of education and policy, how well do you feel the kind of current reforms and changes reflect what young people actually need to kind of thrive, not just academically, but in work, life, and life more broadly?
Thank you so much, George. I mean, Josephine was absolutely right. Like the last decade has been a story of these things being actively moved out of education. And the things that have been happening that have supported them have mainly been kind of in spite of rather than because of the system. So I'm talking about things like the Progress 8 and EBAC assessment measures, the way that education has been kind of focusing very much on kind of academic subjects, chalk and talk, traditional methods. I think there are some real glimmers of hope in the kind of recent announcements over the last year, and I know you want to have a really positive tone to this, so I've got quite a few of those to share. I'd say that the kind of announcements that were coming out last year were maybe 25% more positive than I was thinking, so I think there's a lot that we can build on there. So let's call out some of the things that are really good. So the curriculum assessment review has said that we're going to be reducing the amount of academic content. I think it's going to give us more space for things like skills, which were very clearly mentioned in that white paper. The removal of the EBAC, the English Baccalaureate, which was a very narrow set of academic subjects and used as a performance measure on schools, which has undoubtedly caused some of the more creative subjects, design and technology, to wither. And I'd love to see those kind of gaining momentum again. There's a consultation out at the moment on Progress 8, which is the other big assessment measure on accountability measure on schools. And again, I think that's looking in a much more positive place in terms of the kind of breadth of qualifications and focus that are going to be allowed. We've got the renewal of work experience, caveated with the fact that I think that needs some money behind it. Please, government, schools can't do that. Schools can't just do that on a shoestring. But seeing that as important is a positive first step. We've got Skills England coming along and working the skills from Skillsbuilder's framework into the way that they see the jobs and the changing labour market. We've got those skills within apprenticeships, although I think we want to see many, many more of those opportunities for young people. And then we've got the commitment to enrichment and the work that Fran's been doing. And I know she'll say much more about that shortly, but the fact that that's been kind of really prominent in those announcements, I think is really positive. So that's the kind of positive bit. So I think there's loads of like things that we can build on there. But to my mind, it doesn't go anywhere near far enough. And some of the practice that I'm seeing on the ground in schools and colleges where they're really putting this at the centre shows the way to where we should be going further. So embracing things like extended project qualifications. You know, why is every young person not able to access a project qualification? And there was some great research recently by Oxford Brookes University that showed that the access to those was very much based on kind of income. And there are deserts where young people from less affluent backgrounds are not able to access those, and yet we know they give these kind of skills. We know that they're really well recognised by employers and by higher education. Great work on things like interdisciplinary learning, on bringing employers into the classroom, on engaging or connecting education much better with the youth sector. So I feel like there's lots to be hopeful for, but I also feel like there's lots for us to push further forward on. And some of the things that are happening on the ground show the way forward, and policy should be encouraging and supporting those and making sure that they become the norm for young people.
Thanks, Olly. I think there's also something there, like you said, about it's almost best practice, isn't it? And being able to show those opportunities to really showcase those organizations that are doing that work really well and how we can embed those in other structures and systems. Ben, I think if you don't mind, I'll bring you in here. So how do you think with the kind of current changes that essential skills are still being treated as that kind of nice to have, or do you think they're moving now more to that kind of core entitlement, if you like, for young people?
I think we're at a bit of a transition point with that, where, you know, at the moment everybody is making kind of lots of positive noises. I think, you know, to Ollie's point, like everybody's kind of known in their heart for a long time that there's a kind of set of things that are important here. And there seems to be a kind of increasing recognition that the sort of universal framework is a helpful way of kind of thinking about it and kind of implementing it in practice. I think it's still very much at that stage where if you had a kind of sudden change of government who had kind of different priorities, it would be easy to see this stuff kind of falling by the wayside. It feels very much a kind of emergent trend, and the next couple of years I think are going to be really important for you know, making sure that there's that gets kind of more widely embedded in the system, more employers, more schools kind of using that language and thinking about essential skills, so that becomes part of the status quo rather than it being a kind of a new and emerging thing.
Thanks, Ben. And Helene, how do you see that from kind of thinking, I guess, taking it from this kind of all these national changes and thinking about how that impacts you regionally? How do you think these essential skills are kind of being devolved into more kind of localized regional skills strategies? And are there any kind of key gaps?
Okay, so within a devolved environment, our main focus is twofold. One is funding terms. Combined authorities target their funding at adult skills, which is at 19 plus. And so we must remember that we have a vast number of young people, as you highlighted in your first slide, that are in the NEET category. A high percentage of those are in receipt of universal credit and or in receipt of personal independence payment. And what we're seeing more and more of is that those young people actually have the academic qualification, they have the background. We've got increasing numbers of graduates who are out of work at the moment in our region, and the need to incorporate far more essential skills into our adult skills funding and the strategies that we have has been something that's grown really over the last 2 to 3 years. I think it's really important that we ensure we measure success in both ways. We measure the success in terms of academic achievement or attainment, but also how does that help that learner become ready for the world of work? And I think politically on a local level, there is more and more interest in understanding how the money that we invest in the skills market really is linked to what the labour market needs and the needs of those employers. Particularly, I think, around where we want to make sure that where we've delivered learning, where we've commissioned learning, individuals are ready and prepared and able to enter the sector that they've been trained in as a result of that investment. We do have challenges though in this space because adult skills funding isn't the same as employment support funding. So we have very little in terms of employment support funding delegated or, devolved down to regional level. And this makes it quite hard in terms of putting it on more whole scale or embedded essential skills support. And that's something where we're really keen to lobby harder into central government, particularly with the alignment of Skills England with the Department for Work and Pensions, and how actually the view around essential skills on a national level needs to both have a balance between the national programme delivery alongside what might be better or more effectively, impactfully delivered at local level. One of the biggest bonuses for us is the number of organisations, whether that be independent training providers or whether it be our voluntary sector and community sector, that really want to engage with this part of the skills arena. They have a real passion for developing and supporting the young people who live in their communities, and they bring real great insight for us around how essential skills can be incorporated into learning and made into fun, made into something that's relatable, that meets the needs of young people in the communities that they know really well. But for us, it is very much about how do you incorporate essential skills alongside the requirements of adult skills funding to make sure we hit both, really, in order to make the best possible outcome, the most impactful outcome for the learner.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because there's that one kind of kettle of fish that says, well, actually, those young people are already neat. So what can we do to support them? So it's that kind of support. It's that two-pronged approach, is right. That early intervention. How do we stop them from getting there in the first place?
Correct.
And then those young people who are already neat. What are we doing to kind of get them back into employability? Or
George, the other thing I'd add is that, combined authorities, whilst we have devolved power, I hate that word, but devolved power at certain points in the system, in the journey for young people, we also have a massive responsibility in terms of convening. So whilst in the pre-16 space and 16 to 18, we don't have power as such. Our role is very heavily centred on convening those that are active and do have accountability and responsibility in that space, and really understanding that the journey for our young people, we have to start much earlier. We have to think about what's happening at 14 to 18, and really need to understand where the system's failing them a little bit. Because it actually is, there are lots of dropout points for young people along the way. I think Josephine mentioned not really engaging with the education system. Well, actually, our role has to be about trying to tie up some of those gaps. How do we start to bring together the right people that can make sure our young people aren't falling through or aren't ending up in a place where actually they're being asked to do study or to be part of something that they never intended in the first place. And, you know, capacity at 16 to 18 is a big challenge for us. So there is lots that needs to be looked at within the system, as well as how you bolt on things like I said, or how essential skills becomes part of that core offer for our young people right from 14 through, I think.
I think the power versus convening thing, if I can just jump in, is such an important one when we think about the role of employers as well, because so much of the kind of power, whether it's central government, whether it's devolved government, is, you know, power over budgets, power over kind of education and formal kind of training. Nobody is suggesting that employers be forced to give everybody an essential skills test annually or something like that, right? Like, employers have got to buy into this and want to do it because it's in their interests of their own business. And the employers we work with do see that. They see kind of high retention rates for new hires that they're making, greater success rate for kind of apprentices that they're bringing in. But that's never going to be a kind of mandatory thing. That's got to be something that we build through that kind of convening and influencing approach, rather than the kind of the powers bit of the kind of the devolved system.
I think there's something also in here about recognizing that convening, it's a collective responsibility as well, right? Like, not one person or one organization can solve this issue. And it's actually about how do we collectively take responsibility for young people's outcomes, and think about what those, as Helene, you mentioned, what those sticking points, but then also where can we offer the best value, and bring in those values at the real kind of key crucial points. Okay, fantastic. So I guess we've talked a little bit about the kind of wider policy pieces, and there is obviously a lot going on, right? There's a lot of those kind of some really positive movements in terms of thinking about what those changes and the reforms look like. But I'd like us to also then think about what that then translates to on the ground. So, all with that really positive intent and strategy, what's that then going to look like if we actually start to see that devolve? And so I guess, again, just a general question open to you all is, from your experience, what actually works in terms of embedding essential skills in delivery? And how can we ensure that we are able to kind of measure and evidence them to be able to also kind of get more support and influence around those skills in the future? And Ben, maybe that's a good starting point, is to come to you, obviously, through the Skillsbuilder lens first.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And once you've kind of won the battle in terms of explaining to people that these things are, you know, things that you can measure, things that you can kind of build directly, like the how do you do that is the kind of obvious next question. I think we would say there's kind of 6 kind of rough principles, like keep it simple, like we've got a kind of fixed language for this. You can make it really kind of tangible and objective. Start early and keep going. This is something you can start building kind of as young as primary schools. I think we make a mistake sometimes when we talk about this as a kind of careers and work experience thing, of thinking there's a kind of focus on kind of teenagers and colleges, when actually all of these skills are skills that people start building either intentionally or not at a younger age. Focusing kind of tightly on kind of teaching them and being kind of very explicit about what you're doing and giving people opportunities to practice are both really important. It's not a kind of background thing where you do it without young people knowing it. Being really explicit about those opportunities to develop and practice skills is really important. And bringing it to life, I think, is what makes it kind of engaging for people. The whole point of a universal framework is, I make this joke a lot at the moment, but like, it's universal regardless of what young people's kind of aspirations are. In the long term, they're going to need essential skills. Exactly what that looks like depends on what their ambitions are. But I think you can make this kind of relevant to everybody in a way that's really kind of engaging and exciting.
Olly, did you want to jump in there? I can see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to add to that. I think these skills are really hard to teach through just a traditional talk and chalk type pedagogy. Now, there's absolutely a place for that, particularly when you're needing to download a lot of information. And I think there needs to be a balance between knowledge and skills and behaviours in the education system. But teachers also need other things in their toolbox. And so other forms of pedagogy, things like learning through projects, picking out real life questions, bringing in an employer brief into the classroom, taking kids on a field trip, forest school, any of these are more likely to naturally bring these essential skills into the classroom than just talking at and doing written exams. So I think we would love to see kind of more freedom, more trust in teachers as a profession, which has kind of declined, even though these are the people who are doing the hard graft on the front line. More trust in head teachers in leading that, more trust in the education system to try different things, to use different techniques. And when we see that working really, really well in schools and colleges, it absolutely brings these in. So, having a debate amongst students about an issue is much more likely to build your communication skills than just sitting down and writing, or working with an employer to be in a team and suggest an idea about a brief that they presented is much more likely to build your team working than just sitting on your own in an exam hall. It's common sense, and I feel like we need kind of more trust and more opportunities for teachers to use those techniques in the classroom.
Brilliant. Fran, I'm going to come to you there, because I think that also then starts to link in a bit with the kind of enrichment side of things as well, and the other opportunities within the kind of education system.
Yeah, love everything that's just been said already. And I just wanted to build on the kind of best practice question is, when we see this working really well, one of the strongest elements at school level and MAT level is the engagement with the community. And actually bringing providers in, and we seem to have sometimes these kind of silos of education's over here and we use a slightly different language, and then youth and communities over here and we use a slightly different language, and never the twain shall meet. Whereas actually coming together, the potential for building skills in a really kind of embedded and holistic way is amazing. And maybe we can loop back to the questions of how you do this at an infrastructure level. But just one thing to draw out at this point is, in terms of policy that Olly's mentioned, we've got the enrichment framework coming out fairly soon. So it was obviously mentioned in the curriculum assessment review. We've got these broad areas that the government have said that enrichment should touch on, and kind of broad access to these particular experiences. And we await actually what the benchmarks, the content of those. We did publish a report last spring, I think, that was from Duke of Edinburgh's award with Big Education, Oasis, etc. And it's my understanding that the benchmarks are building on those. So we kind of broadly have an idea that it'll be a Gatsby style 8 principles, where you're thinking about what is need to be in place, not, listing activities, but at a structural level, what's needed in schools and MATs. And it's really about that intentionality. You're not just thinking piecemeal about doing a lunchtime club over here and a trip over here, but it's actually, how do we bring the community together, bring providers in, and really kind of do that outside the school walls, as Olly was saying. So community is my big thing to say, this is where the real opportunity lies.
And Helene, over to you.
So if you think about all of that previous couple of bits of input, and then really what does that mean practically on the ground? And the words I wrote down when you asked the question, George, were giving heads and giving schools the headspace to actually do this and do the work that they need to do. And I think that comes back to the trust piece, but in a practical example of how that's working here in the West Midlands is if you look at the Inspiring Futures programme, and actually looking at every school knows what their needs are. They will be able to tell you, that's the experience we've learned. I really need help with X. I really need help with communication skills for my GCSE pupils, or I need coaching on one-to-one, whether it be for English and maths or whatever. And taking away the noise and the legwork about how you establish that help through the Inspiring Futures programme, having the right support brought in and paid for independently, gives schools the headspace to get on with the other stuff that they need to be doing. And I think the sort of first year findings from Inspiring Futures for us have been real eye-opener in terms of community, philanthropic and education working together to provide solutions for schools in this space. Also our Cradle to Career programme, which isn't ours really, I shouldn't claim it, it's Liverpool's. But that again is this bringing community together, bringing them around the school. What are the challenges? How does the local community solve or start the thinking to solve the challenges that it's got? And that then gives space for our education practitioners to get on with the day job that they need to be doing. So I think there are ways that convening power really can be put into practical activity on the ground to make sure that we deliver and give the opportunity for our young people to build those essential skills.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think there's lots of really positive, almost pilots of work that's happening at the moment as well, isn't there? And it is about trying to understand, how that's working and the structures that are behind it. Josephine, I'm really interested. So one of the things that's come up as well is just how do we bolster young people's engagement in essential skills programs? Because we can offer endless amounts of programs to young people, right? But how do we ensure that they want to be involved in it and they are prioritizing their essential skills development as well? And just wondered from your experience what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about as well this week. And I think we've seen also in the white paper, it talked about a national curriculum reform, albeit starting in 2028, which talked about the idea of implementing modern skills. And a lot of the things it was alluding to, my initial thoughts was this could be achieved through what has been discussed by Fran and Helene, that idea of community engagement. And for me, that actually looks like, from memory and still now, to speaking with other young people, that still happens. But essentially, people going into schools to speak about their expertise. So, one in the white paper, one thing that was mentioned was the idea of establishing financial literacy and teaching practical money management, which is something I'm quite passionate about. And my initial thoughts was this is where the private sector, or this is where your financial services can get involved in a quite eloquent way to help actually establish real change, because they can come in and speak about their expertise with the young people or have sessions with teachers to establish that. From what I found the most particularly helpful was when I was in secondary school, we would have alumni come into schools and speak about their experience. Just yesterday, actually, my sister returned to our secondary school, which was where I attended and also took part in the Envision program. She's now working in insurance, and she was speaking about her experience. And most of the young people in the room didn't really have an understanding of it, of even what insurance was, and didn't really even understanding of the careers that exist within financial services. But her going into that, and her going into that meeting, going into that assembly with the young people, she was able to discuss her experiences and really connect the dots. Someone like me, who was once upon a time in your position, is now in this position, and this is how I did it. So I think, to answer your point in terms of engagement, for me, it's always something practical. The memories I have the most of things that stuck, and things that, this probably, it speaks to my own character as well, but I found the things that worked the most were things that involved me, and things that involved me partaking in, not in, whether it be a trip to an office or whether it be a workshop. Those are things that I remember stuck with me the longest and always ignited an element of curiosity, and I want to know more. Even for the initial experience of how Envision was discussed as an extracurriculum activity when I was in lower six, it was program coordinators coming into school to talk about the program. If that was probably done on a virtual basis, whilst I understand we are moving towards a more virtual and digitalized world, I think when it comes to working with young people, the more practical we can get, I think the better. But also, to that point as well, I think, as Helene touched on earlier today, it's also thinking about the capacity of young people. And that's why I think it's so important that, hopefully, when we see this national curriculum reform, or hopefully as we see the importance of support implementation being established through additional funding, a lot of these curriculum activities can happen in the school day and can happen on the time during the time around education, because that allows young people to engage with it without requiring much effort and without losing too much of their own capacity. So I think, to summarize, that is what I do think will cause the most impact. That idea of bringing different stakeholders together, both public, both private, and helping establishing practical activities and practical events where young people are actively involved, but also people from their expertise are sharing their expertise. And if they don't have the capacity to do that, sharing their expertise with educators so they can have those sessions with the young people.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to open this up actually, and to the rest of the panel as well. Of where have you seen really good kind of interventions and delivery happening on the ground that is engaging young people with that kind of relevance where they need to be and having those positive outcomes? Fran.
Yeah, this is such a great question. I love kind of looking at amazing examples because it's always really inspiring. So we are, as part of the Enrichment for All work, we are capturing lots of different case studies and thinking through the examples of partnership and where that's working really well for schools and colleges and how they're engaging with partners. And probably lots of you will have heard of the Right to Succeed Great Yarmouth project. But I had a chat with them and just thinking about their work, it's hugely inspiring. So it's kind of driven by the needs of the community. Firstly, they spend a lot of time working out what do the young people need, what does the area need. Then they're thinking through the interventions that are needed in that space. And it's very much driven by youth engagement, youth focus. So part of their interventions there was around developing new spaces, new youth spaces for young people. There was a youth spot, a chill spot. There was high engagement with like an arts youth program, which was incredible. And one of the things that stuck with me when I did the interview with one of the leaders of the project is she talked about going to the local park and just offering and bringing hot chocolate and opening up conversations with young people, because there were spots in the community where there was kind of high antisocial behaviour. And so they went to these spaces. There were couple of police officers there, but it wasn't in that kind of tone. It was collegiate and it was opening up conversations, what's needed. And they would use that as a space then say, oh, you should try this chill spot, or you should try this youth spot, or you should do. And it was that element. And actually, then when you think about what do we mean by impact, that the antisocial behaviour kind of figures for that area went down by 20% just in that ward. So actually, young people want to have conversations, they want to have spaces and places to go, and they want to have experiences. So it's not only about programs of activity being delivered. I think we need to think really broadly about what are the ways that we introduce young people to those experiences. And Great Yarmouth to me was like, listening to and it was myriad, all the things that they did, but you could tell that the young people wanted, all their programs were full. Another measure of impact, within 12 weeks, they were full. So that is telling you something about the needs. So I'll stop there. I could go on, but I'll pause.
That's great. Thank you so much, Fran. Olly.
Yeah, I wanted to stick with Fran's coastal theme and share a couple more examples, because and there's a question about place-based in the chat as well. So let me pick up a bit of that theme, and I'm sure Helena will want to kind of add to that too. It just feels like connecting people to place is so important in this, making people feel belonging, young people, and then growing into adults as well. And I've seen a couple of great examples of that recently. So we supported some work down on the Isle of Wight in Cowes at the Enterprise College there to develop the Maritime Futures curriculum, which is a kind of fully integrated curriculum in the school that links all of the subjects and the work that's done to the maritime setting of the school. So in history, learning about explorers, but through a critical lens; in design and technology, designing boats; and then in science, understanding the forces on them. And that has been supported to move to 20 other coastal schools around the UK. So it's about that connection. And then up in Morecambe Bay in the northwest, also with that coastal connection. And you're going to come and see this with us in May, George. The Morecambe Bay curriculum is building on the work of the Eden Project to bring a sustainability and lens to all of the curriculum there ahead of the opening of their next big visitor attraction in Morecambe Bay. So another challenging community, which on paper has a lot of difficulties, actually such a rich and vibrant environment, and it just takes one organisation to just bring others together and to make a real difference to the curriculum and have that kind of place-based lens that brings it all to life.
Thanks, Olly. And Helene?
So I've also got one.
Go for it.
It's got nothing to do with the sea, because we have the seaside, because we have very little of that here in the West Midlands, i.e. none. I wanted to talk about it from the lens of growth and the clusters in terms of sectors of employment, where in our region there is clearly growth, there is clearly job opportunity. And one of those for us is around media, culture, TV production. And We are expanding rapidly in parts of Birmingham around the work that we do with Stephen Knight through the Peaky Blinders piece, but also through organisations like the BBC. And as a consequence, working with those organisations about what are the workers that you need, the skills that you need of the workers that are going to come through to make the cultural side of Digbeth absolutely thrive. We've then been able to put together offers to go into schools about those who are interested in this type of work. What would you need to do? How do you come and do a programme sponsored by the BBC to create your own short films, have your own screenings, do the whole thing, right from makeup, costume, filming, sound, acting, the whole piece. And last year, when we launched the first three of these short films, the audience and their parents and their communities were absolutely buzzing at the thought that their young people had created this amazing 3-4 minute slot of video. And we're going through a second round now because the jobs are there. And we've been able to bring in youngsters who have then gone on and now have work in that sector to share their stories about, it's working for me. I did my makeup training at one of our local colleges. I'm now working for Netflix all over the world. So, it's that, how do you make the opportunity a reality, and that our young people can see themselves in those opportunities, but building it around not just a qualification, but the skills that you're going to need, the essential skills that you're going to need to work in that sector.
Brilliant, thank you. There's so many great examples of kind of projects, approaches and things like that are happening in this space as well. And I think it's part of that is being able to see them and share them. But I'm now really interested in just thinking about coming out of the kind of the systems and delivery into the lived experience and the youth voice of young people, right? So all of this is aimed at young people, and the young people being at the heart of everything that we do, and hopefully getting them to where they want to get to in the future. So I guess coming to you, Josephine, how have you seen, I guess, the experiences that you've gone through, this part of kind of shaping and developing your essential skills and competence? How has that impacted where you are today? And I guess another part of that is, if you could, there's lots of policy people in the room, there's lots of youth organisations. What do you want to say to us? If you could just tell us one thing, what do you want to say to us to shape how we do things moving forward?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think one thing is, just at the moment, I'm currently working as an analyst at Rothschild within the wealth management department. And I think the one thing I'll say to you is that it's probably just keep going, just because you just never know the one young person who sat in class and it's like that information really helped them. I think when I look back at my journey from education to working, the one thing I'm so grateful for was the access to information and the access to being told something. I think a lot of the times there's that idea of not only young people, but a lot of people just not knowing what they want to do, or not knowing what the future holds, and not really having a plan. And often that's associated with someone lacking ambition or lacking focus. But most of the time, that's not the case. They just don't know. They don't know the information out there. They don't know what's available. Recently, I was speaking to a young person who's about to choose their GCSE options, and they've said that they would love a career in real estate, but they're also considering a career in investment banking. He was like, I don't know what to choose. And I said, did you know that there's a job role called real estate investment banking? And he kind of just froze for a second and was like, why has no one told me this? And those moments just echo to me the importance of organizations that are on the call today, individuals like yourself who are on the call today, that just keep going, keep sharing. Because even if you're in a room of 100 young people and there's 2 young people who are just thinking, oh my gosh, that was really helpful. And it was the same thing I was telling my sister yesterday as well. She was like, I went back to school. It was a room full of 30 people, 30 kids in year 12 to year 13. When I saw when the teacher was talking, they were like, oh yeah, just me being told to listen to another guest speaker, and yeah, I have to focus. But then when my sister really came in and really spoke about her lived experience and really was talking about and bridging that gap again, talking about how this teacher, Mr. Bailey, had helped her, and how the things she had learned from his classroom she uses today. You could see that there was that engagement piece of, oh my gosh, like there is actually a connection here. And she was saying the main thing that came through when she had that conversation yesterday was that they had so many questions, and it reiterated to me the importance of knowledge sharing, the importance of information, the importance of creating opportunities. Whilst that's easier said than done, it's so important, because it's not that young people lack ambition. It's not that young people don't know what they're doing. It's not that they're lazy. That's not the case. They just haven't been made aware of what opportunities can be for them. And I think, to Fran's point as well around the assessments, modern day, like current traditional education system makes you feel like you're less than if you can't, flourish in the structures they've put in place. I always use myself as an example. I think I'm a product of that. I always really struggled with exams, and I still hate them. But give me a chance to sit down and do a presentation, give me a chance to do a piece of work over a couple of weeks, work with different people, generate ideas. I'm your girl. But it takes a while to get there, and that confidence, I wouldn't be able to confidently say this about 10 years ago, that I may not do so well here, but I'll do really well here, if it wasn't for those extracurricular activities that helped me solidify my skill set, that helped me establish what I know. So whilst these things can be difficult, and there's been times where I've spoken to some young people and they weren't receptive, and there's times where I've spoken to other people and they weren't receptive, but I don't stop there. I have to keep going, because there's a young person out there who's ready to go, who has all the ambition, all the vim, all the fire, and there's just no one there to help ignite that. So the overarching message is just to keep going, but also look for different avenues, look for different ways in which we can engage with young people. And if it doesn't work, so be it, we try another way, but we don't stop. So that's just the overarching message, and I hope that's really helpful.
God, I love it. I don't even think I could follow that, to be honest, Josephine. I think that, really touches on a lot of those kind of key things that have come through today. But it is about access, it's about information, it's about opportunity, and it's about support ultimately, right? It's about us in this room thinking about where can we support young people, because they do have they do have aspiration and skills, and it's just about harnessing and honing them, and giving them an opportunity and chance to celebrate and thrive. I know that there's some questions from the audience in the chat now as well. So I'm going to hand over to our audience and read through some of the questions that have kind of come in. And give us an opportunity to kind of just reflect on some of the things they're discussing. One thing that I think is quite interesting is Aidan has mentioned here about a focus on performance data, which often feeds our love to quote statistics and measure data. We insist on creating new tools for measuring data, different aspects of skills development. But for me, this detracts from the core purpose of education. We've all spoken about enabling young people to thrive and then contributing to communities as the goal of education. So how much does the focus in policy and in practice on data measurement get in the way of achieving that goal? Do we get sidetracked thinking about how we measure everything, that we don't actually necessarily achieve that overall goal of young people thriving and contributing to their communities?
I mean, at its best, like data collection and impact measurement should be enabling success rather than getting in the way of it, right? It's a necessary precursor to knowing whether you've succeeded, having some kind of measurement. And there are different ways of measuring things, both in terms of the kind of the difficulty and the complexity of doing it, and the kind of complexity of kind of storing it and accessing it. But at its best, like the data enables you to succeed, right? Because the data is about uncovering where the gaps are that you need to fill. The data is about knowing definitively that you have made progress on one thing that enables you to move on to the next thing. I think the challenge we have sometimes in our system is where the kind of accountability, which I know kind of other panelists have talked about, sort of intersects with that data. It makes the data much more higher stakes than it needs to be. But that's an accountability issue, not a kind of fundamental issue, in my opinion, with like data collection and impact measurement.
Yeah, just to add to Ben's really important point there, I think the key question on all of this assessment stuff, and Fran may want to pick up the point after me, is just kind of why are we assessing? So this kind of constant weighing the pig in order to bash schools over the head, I'm not in favour of. But young people themselves being able to kind of have a really clear framework in the universal framework that shows them where they're developing, where their gaps are, where to work on, and that feels like a really powerful thing. I'm learning a language on Duolingo. It's lovely. I like doing the tests. I like finding out what I don't know so that I can do better and kind of get better. I don't want a grumpy letter from them saying that I haven't done well enough this week and they're going to come and take my money away or whatever it might be that performance measures are used for. So I think it's less the data and more what it's used for, as Ben's saying. And I think lower stakes, more trust in the system, I'm absolutely in favour of. But using measures really sensibly to help learners to see where they can continue to develop and where they're already strong and they've got good examples does seem very powerful.
Fran, did you want to come in there? I can see the fingers going up.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button then as well in my excitement. Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's been said and just wanted to pick up on Olly's point. I think it depends. The question you have to ask is, what is the assessment tool doing? So this instrument that you're using, what is its purpose? And if we're thinking about enrichment, you have to think about what's the impact that you're trying to measure. And there needs to be probably multiple tools for multiple things. So if we're saying one thing that I think we probably should be looking at in terms of impact is participation. So my question would be, who is missing? So you need to look at probably the enrichment across your school, Matt, or community provider. Great who you're reaching, but who are you not reaching? So the data can tell you that to begin with in terms of who's missing, and when who is accessing is, getting some data on that to see, are there patterns there, etc. So there's that level, which is kind of the school, and working out then the point of that is to then improve the offer, to then reach the young people that you aren't yet reaching. So that's the goal of that instrument. The next one would be kind of experience. So we're looking at the impact of the experience for the young people and children themselves. That might be light touch assessment instruments like surveys or focus groups, etc., questionnaires, that kind of thing, or reflective moments at the end of a program like Envision or something that they're doing. So that's really useful. And again, it's starting to tell you what's been gained and maybe about the skills that have been developed, and a bit about kind of, that might be where you use Skillsbuilder, etc. And then there's kind of broader impact measures that I would say are not necessarily school map jobs to do or providers, but it's about a kind of a bigger question about national data sets. So what is the impact of what we're doing here in terms of, it might be youth employment, etc. But I would want to dig deeper and say, questions around student or young person's sense of belonging. So in PISA, they look at the index of belonging, for example, elements of the OECD framework on social and emotional development. So I think sometimes the problem is there's so many frameworks and things to measure, but I would say in our pursuit of wanting to delve into, one skill and how that relates to a job outcome, also broader outcomes like confidence and belonging and identity and those things that are also developed. But I think there should be a kind of clear delineation that a school cannot do all this and it cannot do it all alone. So working out what instrument to use for what you want to find out is the first step.
And then Olly, just come to you before we move on to our next question.
Sorry, Fran, just about a couple of other really, really helpful thoughts. So I think there absolutely is a place for kind of unstructured play as well, and seeing some of that in things like the Steiner model that I visited recently has been really, really powerful. But also outside work, I'm a Cub Scout leader, and seeing the kind of the way that the badge structure works in scouting and how excited lots of the Cubs are to work towards those badges. Again, just makes me think how important it is that we just bring all of this together. Like for them, their skills development, their life development is kind of holistic. For us, we look at it in silos. So it would be lovely to have whether that's the kind of profile that Fran's talked about, or some way in which we can say to an employer, to anyone, this is that holistic, rounded young person. They might have picked up some of those skills in the classroom. They might have picked up some of them from Duke of Edinburgh or from being a young carer. It doesn't really matter. They're bringing all of that to the table, and so having a way to kind of show that off, I think, would be really powerful.
And it's not just kids that like badges either, right? I mean, Olly, I don't know how far you are through Duolingo yet, but Duolingo will give you badges as well as you make your progress through your language. I say that as somebody with an embarrassingly long streak and still very little ability to speak French, but it's the badges that keep you going.
There is though, that is also thinking about that kind of like incentives at any age, right? There are those kind of universal things. Brilliant, thank you. I guess coming to another question now is, given the urgency around the kind of NEET challenge, what are your thoughts on effective mechanisms for engaging NEET young people in developing kind of essential skills? And what is the role of local authorities or male strategic authorities within that? Helene, straight off
I'm
mute.
going to
I
say,
knew it would be you.
and you knew it
Go
would be
for
me,
it.
didn't you? You
Yeah,
just knew
go for it
that.
though.
Gosh, this landscape is really quite complicated because there are so many different organisations, public sector organisations, who have a part to play. And I think one of the pieces we're feeding back to government quite a lot at the moment is, but actually, who does have the accountability? Who does hold the ultimate responsibility? Local authorities would most probably say, I think 70% of the schools in this region are MATs. So the local authorities would say we have very little accountability in there. The WMCA has no accountability at pre-19, and that's why the convening thing is so important. And our work with FE colleges across the region, we're just about to launch our college compact, which really brings together the desire that actually we are all responsible. Everybody has to play their right part in this and put the young person first, the citizen first, as opposed to, well, my bit of it is this, and I've done that, so it must be somebody else's bit of the system that's letting this young person down. I think there is absolute political will at the minute to try and do this much better, and to have that. Do you make sure that the right people are around the table, trying to source and test new ways of working? We're quite fortunate that we have good relationships with both the Minister for Skills and the Secretary of State in DWP and colleagues within DFE. But bringing all of that together with different success measures, with different aspirations, can at times be quite challenging. But I do absolutely think that there is more we can do. And the other thing I would say is there is no lack of support, whether it be politically or whether it be from the private sector, around trying to solve this problem. Everybody is talking about it. And no matter what steering groups we are operating, what outside insight and intelligence that we're bringing to the table, employers, third sectors, faith organisations, everybody, it comes back down to we've got to do better for our young people. Something significantly has got to change. And I think that would, the last bit, George, would be about the difference between talk and action. Yeah. And how do we actually really bring some of this into reality and really make action impactful for our young people? And Josephine just really, made my day, because her story is very similar to mine. And there is 40 years difference between my entry into the workplace and hers. So something has got to change quite significantly. That shows what we value as society, how we reward young people, and how we make them feel part of their futures and the community that they live in. I think is just so critical if we're going to turn this around. So yeah, well done, Josephine. Total relating, total.
A lovely moment, a lovely connected moment, right? Helene, you spoke there about action. I guess, can I just invite, what action have you seen in this space? Like, in terms of, give me an example of an action that you've seen that has really helped engage NEETs within this kind of area.
So one of the things that was launched in the West Midlands last year was by the mayor, our new mayor, when he was elected, was our youth plan. But the core of that is around work experience and the opportunity for more young people to undertake work experience. So we've secured over 17,000 extra work experience opportunities, but working in partnership with the organisations that are already out there, like Movement to Work. So as we're not going, we're going to fix it over here with a brand new thing, because you know what, there are lots of other people already doing that thing. So how do you bring them all together to say, what is the art of the possible? How do we streamline this, and how do we put young people at the heart of what that work experience should look like? So not only working with key partners, we've also, through our West Midlands Youth combined authority group, ask them to work through, well, what is work experience for you today? What does it really look like? What do you need out of it? What's your experience so far? And actually, what do you want out of it in the future? And that work has been absolutely fundamental in not only trying to create more work experience, but to create ones that young people value, will engage with, and actually see some benefit from. You know, they were very clear. Do not ask me to go and learn how to work a photocopier.
Yeah, fantastic.
You know, that is not what I think work experience should be about. But, you know, those are little nuances. We can smile about it, but it's the truth, and it's the voice of young people about what they need and what they want. The other thing that's very critical, I think, for our young people is that role, the role model, the mentor, the opportunity to hear from other people outside of their unit, if you like, their closest unit, about what work is like for them. And we've had some great success stories through mentoring programs to support young people to make the connections and to help them make the decisions that they want for their futures. So I also think there's a lot more to be done in that mentoring space.
Ollie, I'm going to pause you. I'm going to ask if you can contribute yours to the chat, because I've just got one last question I'd like to just kind of pose to the group. So, and this is really thinking about the young people at the heart of it. So we think about this in terms of creating spaces that young people feel safe. So when young people feel safe to be themselves rather than conforming to fit in, they develop stronger resilience, enhanced creativity, and a sense of self-worth and belonging. What is in place to enable these young people to feel safe first, and then build essential skills? So what are organizations doing to really create that, I guess that's that environment of psychological safety before kind of then trying to do the learning activity? Thoughts from the panel. And Josephine, I'd love your thoughts here as well, in terms of what do you think is important for young people to be able to have the right conditions to learn and develop skills?
I'm happy to go first unless Josephine, you want to. It's really interesting because I saw this question come in on the chat, and I was thinking I would kind of tie it back to how I would have answered. I think it was Emily's question about engaging young people who are NEET, and I think it's interesting. There's new NEET statistics out today. The whole of the press has been waiting for it to tick over 1 million. It seems to have flattened off, and it's not going to tick over 1 million. So they're currently, you know, making a big deal out of like very small changes that are not statistically significant. But however big you want to say that the NEET problem is, it's not like one big problem. It's lots of distinct problems, and different groups need different things. And I think this question is a really nice example of, you know, there are, you know, there's at one end of the spectrum, there's a bunch of people who are NEET who it's a medical condition thing, and it's going to be the NHS's job to solve that, basically. There's another group of young people who it's the opposite end of the spectrum. You know, we've got some people that are engaging with DWP because they're on universal credit and they're getting support through that. But we've also got hundreds of thousands of young people who are not engaging with state services. Some of those people are going to have a relatively negative perception of kind of state services, having had a negative experience of school and stuff. And one of the things that we worked on when in my previous role at Impetus was about supporting kind of grassroots and community charities that have got the kind of the links into those communities and the ability to build trust. So at Impetus, we were funding Streets of Growth, which is a kind of charity in Tower Hamlets that are like literally have got people kind of doing kind of street level outreach. Up in Blackburn, there's a charity called IMO that specializes in supporting kind of Muslim community up there. And I think there's a really interesting and explored piece here about sometimes we think, oh, we've got all these employment support services and programs, how do we get them to the people that need them? But I think there's an underexplored bit about how do we leverage the kind of connections and trust that lots of those community and grassroots organizations already have with the people we're trying to reach, and how do we kind of leverage that to get support to people that need them? And to loop that back around to the kind of original answer, I think that's going to be really essential for some of those communities where like safety building and trust building is an essential prerequisite, because they don't come with that.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. Josephine, can come from a youth voice kind of perspective on this.
Yeah, I think echoing what I said earlier about really engaging with young people, and always, I think practical workshops, practical activities as well, always kind of lean towards to help establish that engagement. I think another important thing that hasn't been discussed too much is the idea of establishing flexibility around young people, and as being flexible with their timings as well. Actually, I do think Helene mentioned it about speaking about capacity amongst young people, and Fran also mentioned about not having rigid things in place for assessment purposes. But I think also when you're proposing an opportunity to young people, whilst you want to encourage them that, this is something that will greatly benefit you, you also want them to feel as if they still have an element of choice and control around how it may look. I do think there's always a risk of not having things too standardized, if not having measures in place, that could become a bit messy, and I'm aware of that. But when I talk about that flexibility and when I talk about like how allowing young people to have a choice is really speaking to them about what they need and what they hope to get from certain activities, certain workshops, and what is something that, and collecting not only data but feedback, because I think that the quote exists of, data without context is noise. We have to collect feedback from them about how they're finding certain things, whether on a weekly basis or on setting a period of times where you feel like, we had a session last week, at Envision, we do what went well, even better if, having something like that in place to help young people feel as if they can give like micro feedback here and there and have that be implemented continuously rather than waiting for something to end and be like, okay, you guys were like the guinea pigs, this was a trial, how did you find it? Okay, now that you've let us know how we found it, we're going to change it again for the next cohort. It's more of how do we make little drops of change to establish something that at the end has obviously space for improvement, but also they could also say improved as time went on and felt as if sessions, there was a drastic change between session one and session two, and they found session two marginally better than session one, or they found session three marginally better than session two. So I would say, to answer the question of, how do we engage with young people as well as practical activities, I would say also feedback. And that can be done again on a vocal basis, or that could be done again at the end of sessions or prior to sessions beginning again, just to find out what went well in that session and how they can improve it to help retain that engagement. Because I think we can all say that when we enjoy something, we're most likely to come back to it. And to Ollie's point and Ben's point as well, that whole system of reward, help us help you. It's always easier to help someone who has somewhat articulated what they need help with, but we also have to create that space where they want their voices to be heard. We have to ask.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think, like you said, that actually comes back of just creating space for voices, but actually hearing what those voices are saying in the room, right? And actually kind of doing something on the back of it, creating action that actually links to what those voices want, what they need, and how we can support them. So we are coming towards the end of the discussion today. And I think just to wrap us up, I'd just like to kind of pose one quick fire question to each of the panel members. What is one action that you believe would make the biggest difference in terms of being able to kind of embed essential skills and support young people's development when we're thinking about the kind of wider policy practice and delivery angle? So one action. Ollie, I'm going to come to you first because you're at the top of my screen.
Of course. Yeah, just to build on what was been said, it feels like the biggest difference that we can make here is making sure that every young person has a trusted adult, whether that's a classroom teacher, whether that's a youth worker, a sports coach, it doesn't really matter. But that's the thing that seems to make the most difference. So at a policy level, we should be encouraging and supporting more. And on an individual basis, we should be doing more one-to-one in all aspects of our life to try and make that happen.
Thank you. Helene?
For me, it's got to be about acknowledgement within the policies and future strategy space that we need to fund this in some way. I'm sure somebody else will work out how that could happen, but ultimately the limited, I won't say lack of, but the limited amount of funding to provide this support, whether it be in school, whether it be in FE, or whether it be in the unemployed space, in the universal credit space, will continue to provide challenge to be able to bring forward the organisations, particularly that Ben just spoke about, because I agree, I do think the third sector, faith organisations, charity organisations based in communities are the link for those needs that we don't know about.
Thank you. Fran?
Yeah, Helene, you've stolen my thunder as well. Completely agree. And I would describe it as brokerage. So I think the thing we need is that infrastructure level of connecting school and college leaders with what is outside of their communities to then bring in this enriched experience. And I just quickly say, so looking at things like AOC are doing a partnerships pilot around the enrichment coordinator, and actually how that can help, looping back to the beginning of the conversation, free up the headspace of head teachers, leaders. It's not their job to deliver everything, but a brokerage role within the infrastructure, I think, could really help with that.
Thank you. And then Ben, I'm going to quickly come to you, and then Josephine before we wrap up.
Boring technocrat that I am, I'd really like it if every DWP work coach was trained on what the universal framework was and how to use it, and every young person that spoke to a work coach did an assessment of their essential skills and got some support to build them.
Thank you. And Josephine, well, what's your one thing?
I think it's been shared already, but that importance of bridging the gap, the brokerage, the engagement between multiple actors, public and private. I think working at Rothschild as an organization, I've seen that do that quite eloquently, in a sense where we do work with charities and we do work with various different schools and all other organizations, and there's opportunities for employees to put their hand up and volunteer directly. So volunteer opportunities are known. So I think one thing for me would be just continuing that engagement between all people within different sectors.
Great, thank you so much. We are having to wrap up. There's so much more that could be said on all of these topics, but a massive thank you to all of our panelists today for such a insightful and thought-provoking conversation, and for some great questions from our audience members as well. We know we haven't got through all of them, but we will share them around, and as mentioned, we will share the contact details for our lovely panel. I think from today, we can really see that there's clearly momentum building around essential skills. It's growing, but there's also still some work to do, particularly to connect that kind of policy intention to that young person's lived experience and what they're experiencing on the ground. But we hope today's discussion is that kind of sparks some creativity, some future action, taking that talk into action, into collaboration, and really challenging us to think about how we can collaborate together for young people's outcomes. So we're going to wrap up there. Thank you so much for your time today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.